Ladies and gentlemen, it's good to be back before you and deal with this particular era that our brother's teaching. I want you to note something here. He actually proved my case again. He admitted that similarity of language does not establish necessarily of itself an identical event. He admitted that. And he then said, well, if it's exact language, if it's the same language, then it must be an identical event. That's basically what he was saying. Well, Amos 1:2 and Joel 3:16 are exactly the same. And yet there's several hundred years between those two events. He ranted and raved concerning Luke 17. Luke 17 is not parallel to Matthew 24. You can check that out in the course of things. Matthew 24 is parallel to Luke 21. It's not parallel. Historically, it won't hold up. You just read the text. Go back and read the text. You kept chiding Gary about studying eschatology. You didn't even know that Luke 24 parallels, or Luke 21 parallels Matthew 24. Not Luke 21 or Luke 17 parallel Matthew 24. That's where you are. On top of that, in looking at Luke 17, he's talking about this as signs or symbols. Now, watch this. As a sign, he appealed to this. But first must he suffer many things, be rejected of this generation. Now look down at verse 26. This is Luke 17. As it was in the days of Noah, so, and as is an adverb of manner here, so shall it be also in the days of the Son of Man. That is, when he comes. They did eat, that is, they were making a practice of eating. They drank, they made a practice of drinking. They married wives. They were given in marriage until the day that Noah entered into the ark. What was going on? Their normal activities. They were caught unaware. That's my point, not your point. Your point is that this was a sign. Now, notice, he says they were marrying and giving in marriage. Now, if they were marrying and giving in marriage, they were caught. Does that imply that now there is no marriage or giving in marriage? If marrying and giving in marriage was a sign of the destruction of Jerusalem, then it must be the case that marrying and giving in marriage has now ceased. But let's come on down. It gets even better than that, the absurdity of his position. Look at verse 31. In that day, he which shall be upon the housetop, and his stuff in the house, let him not come down to take it away. And he that is in the field, let him likewise not return back. Then he says, remember Lot's wife. That's the point. That's the application he's making of this. That your materialism will not save you. Now think about this aspect. He said, well, the Jews lived on the rooftop. They had flat roofs in those days. He's implying that they're not flat roofs today. I lived in a house that had a flat roof in Taiwan, 2 years. In fact, a lot of the houses in Taiwan, in China, in Asia, in Africa, even in Europe, have flat roofs. There are even flat roofs that people use and live on, and they sunbathe, and they cook out, and they do all sorts of things on their flat roofs. Even in the Middle East right now, they live pretty much like they did in the time of Jesus. Yeah, hang your head. They would do that. They would do that. But notice this. While they're on the rooftop, you've got some out in the field up during the day. Now, verse 33, or verse 34. We're going to pick up with these. I tell you, in that night, in that day and in that, how can it be night and day at the same time? How can it be night and day at the same time? Watch it. There shall be two men in one bed. The one shall be taken, and the other shall be left. Two women shall be grinding together. The one shall be taken, and the other left. Two men shall be in the field. And by the way, they weren't in the field at night. They didn't do their gardening and things of that nature in the night. We're back in daylight. Two men shall be in the field. The one shall be taken, and the other left. What's implied is a universal coming. That's not the destruction of Jerusalem. That if Jesus came on a particular day in the destruction of Jerusalem, then, ladies and gentlemen, that's one coming, one time. He's got multiple comings here. If he says that, well, it was night on one occasion and day on the other occasion. That's what he's got. He's got at least two comings there. It's just pure nonsense. Now, what we have simply is this. There are many texts that he uses that we believe do refer to the destruction of Jerusalem. Definitely a large portion of Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21 refers to the destruction of Jerusalem. We don't doubt that. Haven't contested that. He seems to think that we believe that all the ends are at the end of the world. He believes, however, that all the ends refer to the destruction of Jerusalem. I figured that he'd get up here and say, hey, we're living now in the time of the destruction of Jerusalem. Given his little joke about me believing it's the end of the world. What's good for the goose, good for the gander. You can just turn that around on him. He says every time you see the word end, it's referring to the destruction of Jerusalem. Isn't that so? Yes, that is exactly what he believes. Now, what's happening is he takes similar passages or similar expressions and phrases and so on, and he ties them together and doesn't really make an argument on the text to show from the context that you're dealing with the same event. As I said, he didn't even know that Luke 17 is not a parallel text to Matthew 24. He just assumed it. And then went riding off in all directions. And so he has this assertion or this idea that these things are the same. By the way, the reference to the eagles, if you look carefully in the Greek text, both texts are different. The constructions are quite different. They can be translated the same, but they're not the same constructions. And that's what you've got. Now, again, Amos 1:2, Joel 3:16, Jehovah shall roar from Zion. Exactly the same, both texts. According to his position, what he just said, Amos 1:2 must refer to the same event as Joel 3:16. Can't be two different events. And yet, that's exactly what the case is. Amos 1:2 is dealing with God's judgment on Israel through the Assyrians, which was fulfilled in 722 BC. Joel 3 deals with an event that occurs sometime after the day of Pentecost as Joel 2:28 through 32 is quoted by Peter on that day as beginning fulfillment on the day of Pentecost in Acts 2. So that brings you down to 30 AD, at least. 722 plus 30 years is 752 years. So we can do a little math too. And the result is you've got over 700 years between these two events that should have occurred at the same time. But they didn't. Now this is why we illustrated the point. I said that we agree with many passages referring to the destruction of Jerusalem. And we accept all the passages he cited. We believe every one of them. We just don't agree with his application, his interpretation. In fact, the devil quoted Scripture and misapplied it. That doesn't mean I'm obligated to accept it or that the Lord was obligated to accept it simply because he quoted it. His application was wrong, and that's what we have here. Now, in illustration of this point, back on Tuesday night, we played a little video that illustrates that even exact language can refer to two different things.
Is this my car?
State Farm knows that for every one of those moments,
This is ridiculous!
there's one of these.
Is this my car? What? This is ridiculous.
This can't be happening!
This can't be happening.
Oh, it's happening, sweetheart.
Oh, it's happening, sweetheart.
Shut up.
Shut up!
That's the exact language by both of them. I guess then the cars are the same. Given his reasoning, the cars must be the same car. That's what he has implied. He talks about needing to take a class in philosophy. He needs to take a class in logic. He's implied this nonsense. By the way, there's still a logical argument that was set up, that was put forth, involved a modus ponens form, major premise, minor premise, which you admitted, and conclusion that's demanded in the argument, and shows that your doctrine is false. It falsified it last night. Your doctrine went down, and you can't bring it to life again. In fact, you're out of resurrections. You have used up your resurrections. Now, in dealing with this particular doctrine, I'd like for you to notice this chart. This chart on the spiritual death of the church. We asked this question on Friday night. Number 5. The church was spiritually dead until AD 70 and the destruction of Jerusalem. What did he say? False. The church was not spiritually dead until AD 70 and the destruction of Jerusalem. Last night, we asked this question. All faithful Christians prior to the destruction of Jerusalem were in need of spiritual resurrection. He said it had to be consummated. He doesn't explain what he means by that, Hebrews 11:39-40, but he marked it true. Well, if all faithful Christians were in need of spiritual resurrection at the time or prior to the destruction of Jerusalem, they were in need of it. And they're faithful Christians, but they're still in need. We're not talking about individuals who are alien sinners in need of resurrection. We're talking about all faithful Christians being in need prior to the destruction of Jerusalem of spiritual resurrection. Well, what does the church consist of? Christians? Christians? And if the Christians need resurrection, doesn't the church need resurrection? In fact, he's been referring periodically in certain passages to the resurrection of the New Testament body, and then in other passages to the resurrection of the Old Testament body. It seems he kind of picks and chooses which one's under consideration in any given text. Well, if the church needs resurrecting, if it needed resurrecting, did that not imply that it was dead? That was one of the points I made in my first affirmative on Tuesday night, that the word resurrection implies certain things. See, they have to change the definition of terms. They, in effect, at times are using the word resurrect to simply mean some form of raising. Well, I just raised my Bible, but it's not a resurrection. That's where they are. And that's a misuse of language. It's equivocation. And it's a fallacy. And Brother Warren would have taught you that and warned you about that. In fact, he'd be here, he'd be on my side and telling you you're wrong. Now, since he's implied the spiritual death of the church, when was it alive? Now, Brother Baisden admitted on Facebook that the church began on the day of Pentecost. He admitted that. So if the church started on the day of Pentecost, was it alive then, or was it born dead? Was it DOA, dead on arrival? If it was born dead, that's an absurdity. It's an absurdity. If it was alive, then it had to, at some point after that, die. What killed it? What caused it? What adequate cause? And he understands the law of causation. I'm sure he does. He knows if he goes out and tries to start an automobile and it won't crank, and he examines that car very carefully, there has to be an adequate reason why it won't crank. An adequate cause for the effect. If the church was spiritually dead, what killed it? And how long was it dead? He's in a mess on this. And he can get up here and rant and carry on, and that's not going to get him anywhere. And he can ridicule people all he wants. It's not going to get him anywhere. He went to Revelation, and you know what's interesting concerning the book of Revelation is he tried to use it. He emphasized it's a book of signs. And then what did he try to do in chapter 6? Interpret it literally. And by the way, I never argued for open-ended eternality for created beings. I understand we're contingent beings and contingent things, but I also understand we have a spirit that lives on in eternity. Do you believe your spirit gets old? Do you believe that in eternity your spirit is going to age? You're going to grow a beard on your spirit or do something like that? Is that what's going to happen? That's just nonsense. We're not talking about open-ended eternality, but we're talking about spirit beings in a realm where there is no perception of time, simply because the markers, the means by which time is measured, do not exist. They're not there. We're not talking about inherent immortality either. We understand that our immortality of spirit, our very existence is dependent upon God. Never argued the other. He's assuming my case and accusing me of something never said. By the way, they have written in their little pamphlet that a position, or taken a position, that implies that if you don't hold to their view of spiritual death, of the resurrection, of the judgment and so on, your baptism's not valid. That's the implication of the article by Brother Baisden. He's in that position. Now, do you believe that? Do you believe that one has to hold to the position that you hold to on these things, that understanding, in order for their baptism to be valid? Do you make that then, do you say that the whole subject's a test of fellowship? If that's so, have you been rebaptized with that understanding? I'm predicting that eventually they're going to go that route. Individuals who take such positions and then tie them to salvific matters as they have are ultimately duty-bound by their hobby, by their golden calf, to do that. And we've seen that from groups of various kinds. Now, was the church spiritually dead? He said these faithful Christians needed to be resurrected, so they were spiritually dead.